I'm Samantha, 32, and I used to be the kind of person who bent over backwards trying to please my husband's family. After 8 years of marriage to James, things were becoming increasingly strained. That fateful morning, James made me what he called a special coffee with a strange smell I couldn't quite place. "Made you a special coffee, honey," he said, with an unusual gleam in his eyes. I answered, "How sweet," and quietly swapped mugs with my sister-in-law Ashley, who had bullied me relentlessly for years. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with toxic in-laws. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millfield, where everyone knew each other and life was simple but happy. My parents worked hard to make ends meet, my father as a mechanic, and my mother as a nurse at the local clinic. We never had much money, but we had love and principles, and my parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity from a young age. I met James during my sophomore year at State University. I was there on a partial scholarship, working 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest of my expenses. James, on the other hand, came from wealth. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Northeast, and he never had to worry about money a day in his life. We met in an economics class where we were paired for a project, and despite our different backgrounds, we hit it off immediately. James was charming, confident, and seemed genuinely interested in my life and dreams. When he asked me out, I was surprised, but flattered. Our first date was at a fancy restaurant I could never have afforded on my own, and I felt like Cinderella at the ball. As we continued dating, I was introduced to a world of privilege I had never experienced before: designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways. It was intoxicating. When James introduced me to his family 6 months into our relationship, they seemed welcoming at first. His mother Evelyn gave me an air kiss and commented on how quaint it was that I worked my way through college. His father, Robert, barely looked up from his newspaper, but nodded in acknowledgement. It was his brother Thomas who showed genuine warmth, giving me a real hug and telling James he had finally found a real one. Thomas's wife, Ashley, however, gave me a once-over and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Our engagement came after a year and a half of dating. James proposed during a ski trip to Aspen, getting down on one knee in the snow with a diamond ring that probably cost more than my parents' house. I said yes without hesitation, believing I had found my happily ever after. The wedding planning process was my first real indication that my life would never truly be my own in this family. Evelyn took over immediately, dismissing my simple ideas as charming but inappropriate for a Thompson wedding. The small, intimate ceremony I had dreamed of turned into a 500-person extravaganza at the country club. My parents looked uncomfortable in their formal wear, clearly out of place among James's champagne-sipping relatives and business associates. I had only 3 friends from my old life among the guests, while James had his entire fraternity and social circle in attendance. After the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to the Maldives that Evelyn had selected, James and I moved into our first home together. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial-style house that James had already purchased before proposing. I was shocked when I realized it was only a 10-minute drive from his parents' estate. When I questioned this, James assured me it was just coincidence that the perfect house happened to be so close to his family. The family dynamics became clearer over the first 2 years of our marriage. James was the youngest son, the baby of the family who could do no wrong in his mother's eyes. Thomas, 4 years older, had always been held to a higher standard and had worked his way up in the family business from the ground up. James, meanwhile, was given a vice president position straight out of college. Ashley had been Thomas's high school sweetheart. She came from a family almost as wealthy as the Thompsons and had the pedigree Evelyn approved of. Ashley was gorgeous, polished, and perfectionist in everything she did. She had studied interior design but never actually worked, instead focusing on maintaining their immaculate home and social calendar. She and Thomas had two perfect children, Madison and Bradley, who were 8 and 6 when James and I got married. At first, Ashley's bullying was subtle. She would forget to invite me to ladies' lunches with Evelyn, then apologise profusely when I found out. "Oh, Samantha, I assumed you'd be working at that little job of yours," she would say with a smile. At family dinners, she would make comments about my clothes. "That's such an interesting choice, Samantha. Very unique." Once, when I brought a homemade pie to Thanksgiving dinner, she made a show of taking the tiniest slice possible and then not eating it. As time went on, her comments became more direct. She would mock my middle-class background, asking if we had indoor plumbing in Millfield. She criticised my career as an elementary school teacher, suggesting it was cute that I wanted to work when I didn't need to. When I would try a new hairstyle or outfit, she would look me up and down and say something like, "Well, I guess we all have our own sense of style." James never stood up for me. Whenever I would bring it up after a family gathering, he would dismiss my concerns. "That's just how Ashley is," he would say. "She doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." After a while, I stopped mentioning it, swallowing my hurt, and trying to avoid Ashley as much as possible at family functions. But with James's family, there was no escaping the twice-weekly dinners, the holiday gatherings, the summer barbecues, and the constant drop-ins from Evelyn, who had a key to our house for emergencies. I felt like I was living under a microscope, with every decision scrutinised and found wanting. Slowly, I started to lose my confidence and sense of self, becoming a shadow of the independent woman James had fallen in love with. By our 5th year of marriage, a new tension had entered our relationship. We had been trying to conceive for 2 years with no success. Medical tests revealed I had a condition called endometriosis that made natural conception difficult. James seemed supportive at first, accompanying me to doctor's appointments and assuring me we would figure it out together. Ashley, however, found a new avenue for her cruelty. At a Thompson family Easter gathering, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "So still no baby news?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Thomas and I conceived Madison on our honeymoon, you know. I guess some women are just more naturally maternal than others." I gripped the plate I was drying so hard I thought it might break. "We're working with doctors," I said stiffly. "These things take time." Ashley laughed, a tinkling sound with no warmth. "Oh, honey, don't worry. Some women just aren't meant to be mothers. And besides, James was always so good with Madison and Bradley. I'm sure he'll be an amazing uncle to the new baby." I froze. New baby? Her hand flew to her mouth in mock horror. "Oh, Evelyn hasn't told you yet. Thomas and I are expecting our 3rd. Due in November. I thought for sure James would have mentioned it." He hadn't. And from the gleam in Ashley's eyes, I knew she was aware of that fact. The bullying continued at every family gathering. When I gained weight from the fertility medications, Ashley would offer me diet tips in front of everyone. When I mentioned the adoption agency we had contacted, she made comments about how blood is so important to the Thompson legacy. Once, she even suggested that perhaps James should consider other options if he really wanted children of his own, looking meaningfully at her attractive single friend who was visiting. James's reaction to my distress became increasingly dismissive. "You're overreacting," became his standard response. "Ashley is just being helpful in her own way. She wants what's best for the family." Around this same time, James began mentioning a new co-worker named Diana. At first, it was casual mentions about projects they were working on together. Then, it became dinner meetings that ran late, weekend work sessions, texts and calls at odd hours that he would take in another room. "Diana thinks we should approach the Miller account differently," he would say over breakfast. "Diana recommended this great restaurant we should try sometime. Diana is so efficient." You wouldn't believe how quickly she turned that report around. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then James started working later and later. Our once active sex life dwindled to almost nothing. When I tried to talk to him about how disconnected I felt, he would blame work stress or suggest my fertility medications were making me emotionally unstable. One evening, I overheard a phone conversation as James spoke in our home office, thinking I was in the shower. His voice was low and intimate in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "I miss you too," he was saying. "No, she doesn't suspect anything." I know, but we need to be patient. It's complicated. I promise we'll figure it out." When I confronted him afterward, he claimed he was talking to a client about a sensitive deal, but I noticed how he started keeping his phone face down and taking it with him even to the bathroom after that. At a Christmas party at Thomas and Ashley's house that December, I noticed something odd. Ashley seemed to know things about Diana that I didn't even know. She asked James how Diana's mother's surgery went, before I had ever heard Diana had a sick mother. I watched them from across the room, the way they whispered together and then quickly separated when they noticed me looking. A few weeks later, I found a receipt for a diamond bracelet from a high-end jeweler in James's coat pocket. My birthday had passed months ago, and our anniversary was still far off. When I casually asked about it, James became defensive and claimed it was a gift for his mother. But when Evelyn's birthday came and went without her wearing any new jewellery, I knew he had lied. My suspicions grew, along with a deep sense of anxiety that settled in my chest like a stone. I began having trouble sleeping, losing weight, and feeling constantly on edge. When I suggested marriage counselling, James accused me of creating problems that weren't there. "Maybe you need therapy," he suggested. "All this baby stress is making you irrational." I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I really just being paranoid? Was Ashley's bullying actually as bad as I thought? Or was I being oversensitive, as James claimed? I started doubting my own perceptions, which I later learned is exactly what happens with gaslighting, a term I didn't even know at the time. Everything came to a head at a family dinner about 3 months before the coffee incident. We were at James's parents' house for his father's birthday. I had excused myself to use the bathroom, and on my way back, I passed by James's coat hung in the hallway. His phone buzzed in the pocket, and without really thinking about it, I glanced at the notification on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear that blue tie I love. D." My heart pounded as I stared at the message. There was nothing explicitly incriminating about it, but the familiarity, the intimacy of it struck me like a physical blow. I quickly returned to the dining room, trying to compose myself. When I sat down, I noticed James and Ashley whispering in the corner by the bar. When they saw me looking, they immediately separated, Ashley smirking as she rejoined Thomas at the table. That night, James announced he would be making me breakfast the next morning, as a special treat. It wasn't something he normally did, but I was so desperate to believe our marriage could be saved that I was pathetically grateful for the attention. The next morning, he made me a smoothie with a special protein powder he said would help with my energy levels. I drank it, noticing a slightly bitter aftertaste, but thinking nothing of it. By lunchtime, I was violently ill, stomach cramps, vomiting, and dizziness that left me bedridden for 2 days. James was solicitous, bringing me tea and toast, suggesting it must have been a stomach virus going around. A week later, he made me dinner his mother's special recipe, and again I was sick within hours. This time, the symptoms lasted longer and were accompanied by a foggy feeling in my head that made it difficult to concentrate. After the third such incident, I made an appointment with my doctor. Blood tests showed nothing definitively wrong, though my hormone levels were unusual. The doctor suggested it might be stress-related and recommended rest and a follow-up in a month if symptoms persisted. Something didn't feel right. Call it intuition or self-preservation, but a voice inside was screaming that something was very wrong. I began to secretly avoid eating or drinking anything James prepared. I would pour smoothies down the sink when he wasn't looking, claim I had already eaten lunch when he brought me surprise takeout, or say I wasn't hungry when he made dinner. Mysteriously, when I avoided James's food and drinks, my symptoms improved. The stomach pains lessened, the brain fog cleared, and I started to feel more like myself again. This couldn't be a coincidence. Late one night, while James was on a business trip that I now suspected involved Diana, I began researching my symptoms online. The results were disturbing. Poisoning, particularly with certain medications, could cause exactly what I had been experiencing. I dug deeper into cases of spousal poisoning and gaslighting, reading accounts of people who had been systematically drugged by those they trusted most. Each story sent chills down my spine because they sounded so familiar. The unexplained illnesses, the controlling behavior, the victim doubting their own sanity. I felt sick, not from poison this time, but from the dawning realization of what might be happening in my own home. The next day, I purchased a small hidden camera and installed it high on a bookshelf in our kitchen, angled to capture the counter space where James typically prepared food. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I would review the footage and laugh at my wild imagination. James loved me. He wouldn't hurt me, would he? 2 days later, I had my answer. While James was at work, I downloaded the camera footage to my laptop and began reviewing it. For the first hour, there was nothing unusual, just empty kitchen footage. Then James entered, humming to himself as he prepared a protein shake similar to ones he had made for me before. I watched in horror as he pulled a prescription bottle from his pocket, checking over his shoulder before adding several pills to the blender. He crushed them thoroughly with the other ingredients, poured the shake into my favorite cup, and placed it in the refrigerator with a note that read, "For Sam, special energy boost." My hands trembled as I rewound and re-watched the footage 3 times. There was no mistaking what I had seen. My husband was drugging me, deliberately, methodically. When James came home that evening, I was waiting, forcing myself to act normal, while my insides screamed. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that made my skin crawl. "I made you a shake earlier," he said casually. "It's in the fridge. That new protein powder that's supposed to help with fertility." I took a deep breath. "James, what exactly are you putting in my food?" His expression flickered just for an instant before settling into concern. "What do you mean?" "Just the supplements I told you about." "Why are you feeling sick again?" "I saw you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I saw you putting pills in my shake this morning." James's face darkened, then cleared as he laughed. "Pills, Samantha, they're supplement capsules. I told you about them. They're to help with your hormones. Did you think I was, poisoning you?" He laughed again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Honey, you're being paranoid. This is exactly what the doctor was talking about. Stress making you imagine things." "I have it on video," I said quietly. The shift in his demeanor was immediate and frightening. His eyes hardened, his posture stiffened, and for a moment I saw a stranger in place of my husband. "Video, you've been spying on me in our own home." His voice rose with each question. "This is insane, Samantha. You need help, serious psychological help. I'm going to call your doctor tomorrow, maybe even my mother." "She's been worried about your behavior for months." The mention of his mother was the perfect touch, a reminder of the family unit that would close ranks against me. I felt myself wavering doubt creeping back in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they were just supplements. "I want to know exactly what pills those are," I insisted, but with less conviction. "They're fertility supplements," James said, his voice softening as he sensed my uncertainty. "I got them from a specialist Diana recommended. They're not available over the counter. I was going to surprise you when they worked." He reached for my hand. "Sam, I want a baby as much as you do. Why would I do anything to hurt you?" His explanation was smooth, reasonable, and completely plausible, except for the secretiveness, the fact he'd never mentioned these supplements before, and the coincidence of my illness after consuming them. Still, I let him convince me I was being paranoid. I even apologized for doubting him and promised to drink the shake. That night, after James fell asleep, I poured the shake down the bathroom sink and flushed the toilet to cover the sound. Over the next week, James's behaviour became increasingly controlling. He began checking my phone regularly, just making conversation about your texts, he claimed. He installed a tracking app that was supposedly for safety, so we could locate each other in emergencies. He started picking me up from work instead of letting me drive myself, claiming he just wanted to spend more time together. I felt like a prisoner in my own life, but I played along while secretly making plans. I created a new email address at school where James